Since the United States Supreme Court decision in Janus versus AFSCME Council 31, many are asking the question, what does this mean for public sector unions and public plans? This panel will discuss the impact of this 2018 ruling on the recruitment and retention of public union members and speculate on the long-term implications for unions and public pensions. Please help me welcome Hank Kim, who will moderate this session and introduce his distinguished panel.
Great. Thank you, Tina. Great. No, I don't think we need any PowerPoints. So thank you, everyone. Good morning. Before I introduce the panel, I do want to say that we want to try to make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to step into the 21st century. We've had a number of presentations about technology and such. And so what I'd like to do is, if you have a question, I'd like for you to utilize our conference app. One of the features of the conference app is the messaging technology. And what you can do is click the button for the message. In the compose section, start typing in my name, Hank. It is, right. And it will preload my email address that's on the app and send us your questions. I think this is going to be a very interesting and informative session for us. And so we've talked about a number of topics we think that we'd like for you to understand, but we certainly want to get your questions over the next 50 minutes. So with that, let me introduce the panel and ask them to say a few words about themselves and their organization. So to my immediate right is Doug Burnett, who is with AFSCME, and then further to my right is Ed Muir with American Federation of Teachers, AFT. Doug, you want to say a few words first?
Yeah, thanks, Hank. It is great to be here today. My name is Doug Burnett. I'm Associate Director of Political Action with the National Union, with AFSCME. And in that role, my job is to work with our affiliates both on state legislative actions to help grow our union, but also I work in the electoral space as well. And so in that role, we'll work with them on federal races, but do a lot of work in state legislative races as well as in local races. And so I work with them in particular around things that we can do policy-wise in preparing for and reacting to the Janus case, as well as the many additional attacks that are coming from right-wing anti-union groups.
Great. Thanks, Doug.
And I'm Ed Muir, and I work at the American Federation of Teachers. And for those who don't know, the American Federation of Teachers is a 1.7 million member union, and we represent teachers, but also all other workers in pre-K to higher education in America. We also represent some public service workers outside of education, and we have a growing organizing space in healthcare. And my job at AFT is to manage the team in our research department that does state policy work. And so I'm very familiar with a lot of the work that NCPERS has been doing and about the issues that you guys are facing more broadly, like on the pension front in the States. I just said like a lot. I'm going to try not to do that for the rest of the presentation. I'm also a former participant in the New York City teacher retirement system, as was my father, my mother, my sister, and my cousin Billy. We are the New York Irish family that got lost on the way to becoming cops and became teachers.
Welcome, both of you. So just to level set, I'm fairly confident everybody in the room is aware of Janus, but just in case there are some folks who are not familiar with what the topic is. So the Supreme Court had a decision last year which upended a 40-year-old precedent of allowing public sector unions to charge agency fees. So for those members of public sector unions who, for whatever reason, did not feel that the union completely represented them, the law of the land until very, very recently allowed for unions to charge those members fees for other services that the union provided including collective bargaining, representation in worker disputes, providing good work environments, etc. And last year, the Supreme Court upended that in the case of Janus et al. Versus AFSCME Council 31. So with that brief introduction, and feel free to add to it or amend that, let me ask both of you, to what degree has Janus impacted your unions?
So I will start with AFSCME. So probably 4 years ago, we had in excess of 300,000 fee payers. And what we did as a union, led by our affiliates, but also led very much from the national union, was develop a program to number one, do the internal organizing to reduce those fee payers. And I'll go more into that a little bit later. But the short answer is that in the 10 months now or so that we've been living under the new regime imposed by the Supreme Court, we've retained 94% of our membership. We've had some growth as well. We've grown by about 9,000 members through organizing. We've grown our retiree piece. We were planning internally, given that previous number, for a 30% cut in our revenue and overall combined membership and fee payers. So the blow has not been nearly what was expected. Political Pro did an analysis last week that honestly we wouldn't have done and wouldn't have released, but since they did, they showed our net assets up by $30 million over the last year, a 15% gain. And so the exercise of our planning for the worst and doing the internal organizing has turned out well for us so far.
And it's a similar story for us in that we have about 1.7 million members. We came into this with about 83,000 fee payers. And when I started 20 years ago, we were an 850,000 member union, more or less. I don't remember the exact number, but we've doubled in time. We're an organizing union. We've been lucky, and we put a lot of work into it. So we've been able to grow by our metrics to the point where the fee payers left. We convinced some of them to join. We had growth in our units, and we had new organizing, and our membership number total is now about where it was.
And are you seeing any trends relative to membership growth or decline depending upon the state, whether it's urban, whether it's rural?
We have a lot of active organizing campaigns in healthcare and in higher education, and right now in charter schools, you are seeing some real energy there. But in states like Texas and Florida that were right to work and you were not able to charge a fee for representation to non-members even prior to the Janus decision because of state law, those are areas where we've been growing consistently over time and are continuing to grow.
Doug, what's your experience at AFSCME? Similar?
Yeah, it is similar. Our growth areas are in. We've had a external organizing campaign of private sector ambulance drivers, AMR in particular. I think we have 40% of their drivers now and are growing there. And then we have a new organizing area in behavioral health, which with the opioid crisis is a growth area. As far as geographic differences, same as Ed, but where we have, it's essentially where the affiliates and state councils have adopted what we call the AFSCME Strong program, which is a very aggressive internal organizing program we've had the smallest declines. Where we have not seen the state policy network, ALEC-funded Americans for Prosperity type groups across the country have, in selected areas, run very aggressive drop campaigns. They spent, we believe, somewhere in the low single-digit millions of dollars on drop campaigns in the immediate aftermath of Janus in our high-density areas where we had high numbers of fee payers. And remarkably, those have failed. I mean, those were run in places like California, Ohio, New York, Washington, Oregon, Illinois, of course. And they really have not succeeded in the areas that they have targeted.
So let me ask both of you. You both alluded to it, which is you've been preparing and you've been educating. Give us some details about specifically how you've prepared and minimized the impact soon after, and then what sort of continuing education and outreach and organizing you're doing with your local affiliates.
So we saw this coming. There was a set of court decisions. Basically, Justice Alito gave us a sign that this was a thing that he was interested in moving the court towards. And we'd been starting to prepare and build up our internal organizing in response to it. And the first part is a real commitment on engaging with our members and our leadership, our staff, but especially really our member activists, because this cannot happen without it being member to member. We had, in the run-up to the decision, 1 million different organizing conversations internally, at least, and more even since the decision going on, about recommitting to the union. There are affiliates where every member of the union signed a new card as a symbol of their recommitment to the union. We upgraded our data systems, we improved our organizing trainings, we did a bunch of the other things necessary to help us move forward. But it was really, it's building and working with the member-to-member engagement and the activists that was the key thing for us.
That's right, and that's our AFSCME Strong program. That's the internal name for it, and it is to our members and non-members who we view all non-members as potential members. The union to them is their local. It is right in the workplace, and so getting to that understanding of old-fashioned in the worksite discussion about what's happening in the worksite and where the union can be helpful is critical. And to Ed's point about the recommit program, in that we also did across the 4 unions, we developed a partnership, AFSCME, AFT, NEA, and SEIU, which collectively represent over 6 million public sector employees, a very high degree of coordination around this issue, both from the legal front, but also from on the research side around what those recommit cards look like. In many of our councils and locals, a union card had not been signed for 10, 20, 30 years because of the history of recognition of a union. And so these membership cards were often outdated, hadn't kept up with the law. And so we have run campaigns to do brand new membership cards that anticipated the Janus decision, and so are much more durable when it comes to maintaining membership. On that, one point about the Janus case that I would add to Hank's summary is the Janus case is about non-members of the union. It had no impact on the relationship between the union and its members. The right and anti-union forces often try to conflate it and say that suddenly there is a whole set of constitutional rights that have been imparted on members of unions. No, the rights have been imparted on non-members of unions. And so that is a critical distinction, and I think has helped us both with these new membership cards and with proper interpretation of the decision to sustain our membership going forward.
So, I think, Doug, that's a great segue. Clearly, there is, renewed energy, from the Janus case. Probably not the positive energy we wanted, but I think it is good energy so far. Is it sustainable? Do you think 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, what does the union movement look like post-Janus, 5-year mark, 10-year mark later?
So I think that's actually the biggest question for us going forward, is how do we maintain the energy that's been created by this? I mean, people did not run away from their union. People ran towards their union. It
Right.
was the reaction to this that we saw in our membership and our activists. And the union has been very focused on the representational needs of the membership. And I mean, we're at the point where we help you with the weather when there are extreme storms. We are in the public policy fights. There's a just set of things that the union does. And maintaining that energy going forward, I think, is very important. And people who had understood the culture and the value of the union stayed with it. As new people come in and people retire, being able to talk to those new people and show them the community of interest is going to be the challenge going forward. And that's just the next step in front of us, and we're preparing to take it on.
Yeah, that's right. One of the risks going forward, the public sector union model has been based on the concept of exclusive representation, in which a majority of the members choose a union, and then once they have chosen that union, the union is obligated, has a duty of fair representation to represent all of the workers in that union, in the union that was duly elected. Recognizing now that the anti-union forces have seen where Janus has taken them, that it clearly was not the silver bullet that they were looking for, they are opening up a new front in this battle, and it is an attack on the model itself, which is exclusive representation accompanied by the duty of fair representation. And so last summer at an ALEC conference, they rolled out a new model piece of legislation, which is essentially members only, elimination of, or represent members only, and essentially allow individuals to represent themselves or allow multiple competing representatives within a bargaining unit. And Justice Alito, as he is very good about leaving breadcrumbs as to where he thinks the next step is to go for weakening public sector unions, did that in the Janus decision. He in a footnote or in dicta indicated that the duty of fair representation, exclusive representation, is an impingement on First Amendment rights, whether that's defensible going forward. He didn't say, but he clearly invited litigation. Now, the good news around that is 2 cases were just before the court in the last month, most recently one last week, that were viewed as the strongest cases to go take the next step and attack exclusive representation, and the court declined to take those. So Alito doesn't have his 4 votes yet to do that, to take that on. But that we view as the longer term, larger attack on the model of public sector unionism.
And you've seen that legislation or versions of it be introduced in Indiana and be introduced in Michigan. It has not gotten traction yet. My suspicion is that the employers themselves do not think that this is going to be helpful to them, that this is going to compound their management issues, and that is one of the things that is weighing against it. But it's the foment on the right wing is there.
Yep, yep. An additional danger on that is that there is an instinctive appeal to it to some of our own membership. We used to call people in right-to-work states who don't join the union free riders, in that they are getting representation essentially for nothing. In AFSCME world, we've banished that term. They are potential members, given that members have to opt in, and so creating division with the union within the bargaining unit is not helpful. But that is an area where we've been doing a lot of work to ensure that there's an understanding that dividing up a bargaining unit into members and non-members and those represented by this group and that group takes the collective out of collective bargaining and therefore just reduces the power of everybody.
That's interesting. So, Doug, you did mention, as a clarification to my summary that, what Janus did was, give rights to non-members, but that it did nothing to current members, but these new set of cases and legislation are, in a way, attacking that
Exactly.
retained right.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Janus case did not reach that.
Right.
And it was not about that. But that clearly is I don't know if it's 5 years, but it's in the next time horizon.
The litigation is coming, yeah.
Yeah.
But you also see efforts in state capitals from the same people who work on pension privatization to make the case that Janus actually should change how the employer communicates with union members, and that is not something that the case actually addresses at all. That's a political argument being moved into the debate.
Yeah. So Ed and Doug, you guys talked about how the unions have sort of refocused on membership and making those contacts, person to person. And in terms of recruiting, retaining, and employees, are you finding new value adds for the unions or highlighting new value adds, or is sort of the old standard of pensions and collective bargaining, are those still of value to the folks that you're talking to?
A union's got to be able to respond to the signs of the times, and it also has to be able to enforce a contract and show value to its members. I don't think that we are not looking for the thing that is going to be the next big thing. We are looking to listen to what our members are saying, engage with them, and build our campaigns and our representation out of that. And it's really the same as it was. The question going forward is to whether tactically we are going to change how we address issues in an effort to make those conversations bigger amongst the membership. If there was an issue that you might have been able to address by having a conversation with the employer or with an elected leader in political office directly, do you now do a petition instead? Do you now go about it a different way because of your desire to keep the members engaged? That might be the case. And to the extent we weren't doing that before, probably shame on us. But I don't think that we're throwing a baby out with the bathwater in terms of what the role of the union is representationally.
Yeah, in our Ask Me Strong campaign, those conversations that happen in the workplace all started with listening. It was what's going on in the workplace, and the message back was very fundamental. It is about it can be about uniforms, it can be about shifts, it can be about pensions, and yeah, it'll be about salaries and pay. But we also heard, for a large segment of our new membership, it's about student debt. And so we built an advocacy program and an assistance program around student debt. So we've definitely evolved to modernize with the times. The other thing that we've done and figured out very quickly, we have a national polling center where we are able to, on a moment's notice, get the pulse of our membership on virtually anything. And we've built that out. It used to be all phones, of course, but now a large segment of it is on the web. Our ability to respond quickly to our membership has been critical to this success, and our ability to move to 21st century communication methods. 3 years ago, we published a magazine that nobody read that cost us several $1 million a year. That's gone. We are very, very digital. We have cell phones on a very large percentage of our membership now. And so just modernizing the union itself and representation to the 21st century is critical, and is an iterative and ever-changing process.
And I also,
Go ahead.
I think our leadership has also become much more out there, much more public-facing. Our president, Randy Weingarten, if you put together a group of 100 activists, she will go and meet with them. She is on social media all the time. She is in the press. The work that the leaders of our union have done to help basically move the union's image forward and communicate about our values, I think, is also kind of important to this.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to segue a little bit and talk about sort of the overlap of Janus relative to public sector unions and the way it might be used for public sector pensions. So ever since Janus came out, and essentially, the core of the decision is that that money is speech, and that by forcing, according to the Janus logic, by forcing employees to pay agency fee, that you're infringing on their speech. And I've been concerned ever since Janus ruling came down that same speech logic could be used for mandatory participation in public sector pension plans. And I've been concerned that the mutual opponents of public sector unions and public sector pensions, some of the organizations you named, Ed and Doug, ALEC, some of the Koch brother funded organizations, would use that to attack public pensions. I have a little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news relative to that, which is the bad news is there has been a court case alleging that speech infringement relative to public sector pensions. The good news is that it wasn't by one of our mutual opponents. It was actually by supposedly a friendly organization. So without being coy, there was a court case earlier this year. It's the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund versus Operating Engineers 150 out of Illinois. The operating engineers, I think they had good intentions. According to the filings, what they said was, their members are participants of IMRF, Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, that their contributions per Janus is speech, that IMRF is using their contribution to invest in companies that participate in ALEC, and that is a speech that they disagree with, and therefore they sued IMRF saying that this is based on the Janus logic, an infringement on their speech. Fortunately, that case has been dismissed. I don't believe it has been filed for an appeal, but that's the opening salvo, right? That was what I was concerned about, that Alex or the Koch brothers would use. Thoughts about that?
So there's going to be a variety of litigation that builds upon this. You're already seeing the first lawsuits against Bar Association mandatory dues. And in the actual Janus ruling, in the debate, this was raised because the legal foundation that the Bar Association has to charge mandatory dues, actually the controlling precedent, is the very precedent that was overturned in Janus. So there are other dominoes that are going to fall. And the idea that Janus and Citizens United might have a baby and lead to litigation along the lines even of, I mean, you can just start to speculate. Progressive taxation is me being asked unfairly to subsidize government operations, and therefore, that's speech, and I shouldn't have to. So I do suspect there's going to be more. And that very concept of, is the investment itself a political act because the company also does political action, that's out there. The thing that this gets balanced against, generally speaking, is arrangements to provide retirement security for people traditionally involve these sorts of arrangements set up by employers. And the question of how much and how far you want to balance this argument versus everything else, I think, is both a legal and a political question. And I'm not the one to talk about the legal aspects, but I can see the political issues of this kind of a thing. The coalition that would be concerned about that might be bigger than the coalition that is concerned about the due structure of public sector unions.
Yeah. That's right, Ed. The other thing that this decision upsets is a line of cases around what is the extent to which public sector employees have free speech rights in the workplace. And so that's an area where there will be additional follow-on litigation, we expect. In fact, the mayor of Los Angeles, along with a whole raft of additional big city mayors, filed a brief saying, hey, there's a whole line of cases that say that First Amendment rights are really quite restricted within the workplace in an employee-employer relationship. And this cherry-picking one particular extension of that is going to implicate a bunch of other cases. We're not seeing those yet in the pipeline. Honestly, the cases we're seeing in the pipeline, besides the exclusive rep ones that I mentioned, that are really kind of done for a while now, at least this bit of the court taking up cases, are cases that are much more narrow to Janus around attempting to collect back fees for what was the law of the land up until June 27th of last year, and things of that ilk. Those largely have not yet met any success, but they are pursuing them in state and federal court.
So we got a question. In post-Janus, how is the employee who doesn't pay into the union enrolled or participate in the union pension fund, or I guess public employee pension fund?
So if the public employee pension fund is something that is provided by the public sector employer, generally speaking, outside of a state like Connecticut, this is something, your participation in the public retirement system is a result of statute, not collective bargaining. And it is not something that the contract covers at all. So your participation in the retirement system would be completely independent of anything that had to do with Janus. If you're an employee, you would participate in the system. And then within the framework of Janus, if something is covered by the contract, even if you choose not to be a member, you still receive the benefits of the contract, and the union still enforces the contract on your behalf, even though you are not paying a fee to the union. That's the world that was created by Janus. So your retirement benefit is not changed at all unless there is something separate from your employment relationship that the union has created on its own that is entirely a benefit that just accrues to union membership. And then that is separate from your employment relationships completely. That is something that just the union does for its members, and then non-members don't take part in that.
There's another question. Doug, I'll direct it to you. How else can labor capitalize on the momentum created by Janus among members and in their communities?
It's organizing. There are still segments, large segments in the public sector that are unrepresented. So that is number one. And then there are large segments of what we sort of view as quasi-public sector jobs that are 100% funded or 90% funded by public dollars that are done by the private sector. And so, for instance, in that area, we're in behavioral health. In Ed's area, you're in charter schools. And so there's a lot of room for growth. We are at a record, or I should say a 20-year high point for approval of unions on a longstanding, I believe it's a Gallup poll. It is in the low 60s now of what public approval of unions is. I think following on the presentation we just saw, people have made the connection between income inequality and the failure of wages to grow while the rest of the economy has grown enormously, to a decline in union density across the, honestly, across the world. And that one of the antidotes to that and to sustaining growth and growing disposable income is unionization. And so building that with, we've been very aggressive, and I think all of the public sector unions have been with the presidential candidates now on use the word union. It's not a dirty word. 8 years ago, that you couldn't get public figures to actually use the word union because our public opinion wasn't there, but public opinion has moved.
And when we act, people are able to connect with it. We are having more successful strikes than we have had in the last 3 years, basically, in the previous 17 years of my employment, I think. And they are successful because they're striking a chord not just with our membership who sees the value of getting engaged and standing up for themselves, but because we're able to connect them with community as well. The strike in Los Angeles was a strike about the things that needed to be going on in schools, not just to help teachers, but to help the children as well. And keeping the union moving forward so that it's engaged with the community at the same time, I think, is also part of building that.
Great.
Yeah, framing that as red for ed, it's about red for education. It wasn't red for teachers.
Yeah.
It was red for education. It was critical.
Yeah. So we have about 3 minutes. Let me conclude by asking each of you, what in the next handful of years, tell me, what your concerns are, and then what you think are trends that you see that give you hope and that make you optimistic.
The idea that we're at a point where our members have the student debt, and seriously, the fact that we have a program to help deal with extreme climate And what happened with the hurricane in Houston, the water in Puerto Rico, the number of pressures that we are facing in the workplace, the people who we represent, that coming out of that is this energy and this desire to try to move the union forward and use it as a tool that I'm kind of seeing on a systematic basis that's the most inspiring, best thing. That's just fantastic. Questions of whether we can maintain that momentum, questions of whether we're going to get a new challenge given to us by the court, because you're in a place where they keep saying, oh, look, we just made the union stronger by giving the union this challenge. There's a limit to that model. And eventually we might find a pitch we can't hit. So those are the things that give us concern going forward, I think. And then just always being able to address the attrition and the turnover issues within our ranks so that we're having good conversations with people as they come in.
Great.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. The biggest challenge is this is a new model for us. We've successfully survived the first 10 months of it, but that transformation to it has become the most important thing for our organizing is to be in a new employee orientation, is to get the new members when they are hired, because the churn within the public sector in the people we represent is really quite high. It's at around 30% a year, where we need to be. We always be organizing. We are always organizing. We do not have a set of states now where if the organizing falls, will sustain the union. So every single local has to be in this organizing mode all the time. Now, that has strengthened us. We are a much, much stronger union now than we were 4 years ago because of that. But as Hank's question very, very much anticipates, that is something that absolutely has to be sustained. The thing that gives me hope is that we changing a culture within a large institution like AFSCME, which has been around since 1930, is a very heavy lift, and that got accomplished. That got done. We turned into an organizing union from a peer representation union in a very short amount of time in the history of the union. And so that gives me hope that we've set a solid foundation going forward.
Ed, Doug, thank you so much for this conversation. Please join me in thanking Ed Muir and Doug Burnett.